Colorado to Austin, Texas, and um, really started asking questions about why was it so easy to ride on the back streets in Denver, which are in the central area of Denver on a street grid, um, and why was it so difficult in Austin, where you would be on a back street and then it would hit a dead end, or it would sort of like wrap you around and end up taking you in a direction that you weren't expecting to go in. Um, and so just as a person, I was starting to ask those questions and really lucked out. A few of my first friends when I moved to Austin had people that they knew that were involved in city planning, or I made a friend whose dad was at the time like a elected member of their local council for new urbanism, and I just ended up having people in my life who drew me into this lifestyle, for better or worse. Here I am. I went and got my master's degree at the University of Texas in community and regional planning, and there really my focus on housing began. Um, I I came in with a lot of questions about the relationship between built environment systems and social systems, especially uh, equitable social systems and access in cities. And very quickly, I feel like I found my people in housing, in particular in housing for low income people. So I'll kind of just fast forward to now. That eventually, after several other steps, landed me at the organization Texas Housers, where I've been for the last 4 years. And should I pause there? Should I go right into the Texas Housers riff, or how did you want to do that, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, yeah, feel free. Yeah, that was a good kind of introduction. So yeah, you can get into kind of your organization and the kind of specific philosophy that drives you guys.
Great, great. So Texas Housers has been around for a long time. Our organization has existed for 35 years, believe it or not. And our founders work in Austin in particular, although we're a statewide organization. They started in Austin in the 1970s. So that generation of leadership is kind of, in fact, in a process of phasing out right now. But how Texas Housers started really was they were undergrads at UT also, and they were um, they were socially committed people who felt like they had a little bit of smarts enough to say, how can we help? And what they did is they started out in the Clarksville neighborhood in Austin. And if you're familiar with Austin, Clarksville now is very central, very expensive, upscale, a little more single family, I think, than a lot of the folks on this call would like. I couldn't afford to live there. But at the time, it was one of the most central, predominantly African American neighborhoods. The streets were not paved. There were certainly issues, I think, in some of the properties in terms of conditions and access to appropriate amenities. Our founders of our organization started by basically just going to community meetings in that organization as students and saying, how can I help? And the type of help that they needed at the time was how do we get access to funding to improve the conditions here? And then very quickly after that, the question became, now that we have improved conditions and infrastructure, how do we make it so our kids can afford to live here? And like I said, the area is very expensive now, but they preserved 30 something homes as income restricted affordable starting back in the 1970s. And Texas Housers has really focused on low income housing and housing for low income people of color. And so, one thing that I really want to emphasize in explaining what our organization is all about is that we are an organization that works to ensure that housing is affordable for all Texans, especially for low income Texans, and also that it is stable, in particular for renters, that it's dignified, and that conditions at those properties are decent conditions, and that housing is fair, that low income people and people of color have access to what would have been formerly and currently redlined or exclusionary communities, that people have choice in where they live, and that choice is not determined by their race or ethnicity, or by their income, or by any other factor. Um, Over the years, we've been involved in many issues in housing. We've been involved in the intersection of housing and disaster recovery in Houston after events like Hurricane Harvey. We've been involved in improvements to rural housing along the Texas Mexico border, and colonias, and ensuring that extremely low income people there don't have to basically suffer in housing where they thought they were buying one thing and they end up in a place where they have no sewer, no electricity, no water, no wastewater, and so that kind of gives like the broadest scope of what we are. What do we do? We're a small shop and we work across the whole state of Texas. And so we have kind of two areas of our work. One is around community power building. So we do direct work with community leaders, in particular in San Antonio and Houston. We have staff members on the ground that work directly with community leaders to provide support, technical assistance, that sort of thing. We have an education arm where we bring community leaders together across the state to coordinate. We can provide information; they're able to provide information as well. We coordinate efforts. We learn lessons and strategies and housing history. And then our other side is what we've traditionally called an information service, and that's research, policy, so research development, research dissemination, policy development, policy best practices, and then also communications, narrative, framing the issue. Housing, as you all I'm sure well know, is technical and complicated, and we think a lot about how we present various messages to different stakeholders. Um, yeah, I think that about does it.
Okay, yeah, great. And then in terms of kind of current efforts now that you like you were saying that you were just got out of a session at the Capitol. So yeah, just kind of fill us in on the current main efforts that your organization is pursuing at the state level.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in session with the Texas Legislature right now, and Texas Housers has three main priorities. Our three main priorities are to address housing cost burden. We talk a lot about affordability, but we very specifically are using the term housing cost burden to talk about people who can't afford their housing. Um, I apologize. Did I cut out there for a second? I think I'm good now, hopefully. Okay, cool.
Yep, you're good.
Great. We want to make sure that we are pairing solutions to the actual problem. So when we talk about affordability, people can be talking about homeownership, people can be talking about um, renters, preventing homelessness, addressing housing for people who are currently homeless, market rate housing, subsidized housing. The lens that Texas Housers uses is people that are cost burdened. And those tend to be, actually, I should say, those are people who are low income. If you look at any area in the state of Texas, I can almost guarantee you, without even looking at the data first, that renters are more cost burdened than owners, and that the renters that are cost burdened make 80% of area median income or below, and are heavily concentrated at incomes that are even lower than that. So I know Felicity is going to be talking probably more sort of about the land use reform and market approach. And Felicity and I have had conversations about this already. We really see this as sort of a paired thing, right? Like we need to increase the supply of all housing. But at the end of the day, if we don't have additional supports for the lowest income people who are the most severely cost burdened, we're not going to be addressing the problem for the people for whom it's most acute. We can do both of these things at once, and that's part of our message here. Um, we have two more priorities. The second one is to establish or reestablish a baseline of common sense tenant protections for renters in the state of Texas. This is, I'm going to be honest, and this will probably be a theme that we come back to. This is by far the hardest one at the Texas legislature. We have a real tension for our state policymakers, or maybe it's not even a tension, maybe it's just a disinterest in the human rights of renters when balanced against the property rights of landlords and property owners that people rent from. And so I'll talk about this maybe when we get into detail in a moment, but we're in a pretty big fight right now on a bill, House Bill 32, which would be an extremely severe shift in the eviction process in Texas that would make Texas's eviction process the least renter friendly in the entire country, and would really speed up evictions and eliminate kind of the minimal due process protections that renters currently have in the state of Texas. And then the final one, and I'll pause, is ensuring that the existing housing programs and tools to produce low income housing in the state of Texas are working to actually produce that housing and produce it efficiently. So the biggest tool to produce below market housing in the state of Texas is the low income housing tax credit program, or LIHTC. There's several pieces of legislation I could discuss about the LIHTC program and potential revisions that are being contemplated at the Capitol on that program. And then the other one is that we have state level tools for property tax exemptions in exchange for some below market housing. They go under a number of names. Public facility corporations. Another tool is local housing finance corporations have a tax exempt tool that does that as well. And overall, there's been a lot of concern that we're not getting the return of public benefit and benefit to low income people of units that are more affordable than what the market would produce otherwise in exchange for a really generous property tax exemption. That was what I excuse me. That was what I was at the Capitol speaking about today.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was a really wonderful overview. I'm sure we'll go back and touch on a few of those items later in follow-up questions. So now let's move over to Felicity to give you kind of the same prompt of what got you involved in the issue of housing, and then going into an overview of your organization and the philosophies that inform it, and then the current efforts that your group is kind of focused on and why those are important.
Yeah, again, a great question. And the answer to this is trains. Really, it's trains. So in Austin, we've been trying to get a light rail system or some sort of transit forever. At one point, my husband's actually a native Austinite, and we moved away because we didn't have trains here in Austin. And then we came back to raise a family, and we still didn't have trains in Austin. And so it's just been this ongoing effort, as you may have heard. We tried to do some land development code updates here so that we could add additional density that would make us more competitive to get a train system in Austin. That failed. So it sort of felt like we went round and round with a lot of things. And when I got involved with Aura, which is the local Austin urbanist group like you all up in Dallas. Aura has been around basically since 2014, and we're first a transit organization. That's what Aura originally stood for, was Austinites for Urban Rail Action, AURA. Not the way the cool kids talk about it today, although we do like that part too. So Aura is the organization that I originally started with. And I had done some neighborhood things and was really frustrated. And then I got involved with Aura, and that was really a transit focus first. And then we moved into land development and sort of housing issues because we were trying to ensure that we had enough density to support something like a full transit system for Austin. I became a board member just after we had our Project Connect vote. So I worked on the Project Connect ballot initiative, which happened in 2020, 2020. God, we're losing years now. So that was, if you all remember, during the height of COVID, and a lot of cities decided not to move forward with their transit ballot initiatives, but Austin did, and ours passed overwhelmingly. It was a very exciting time because we thought like, okay, this is it. But then, of course, once you pass one thing, you need to do the next thing. And we knew we needed folks who were going to be on city council who would support both the transit efforts as well as more housing to support those transit efforts. So in 2021, I joined the board of Aura and started really working on elections specifically. And we had a lot of success with those 2022 elections in Austin. Everybody wanted to talk about housing. Housing was the hot topic. And it became kind of this eye opener to me of like, I love trains. I still want transit in Austin, but it is really one of the key drivers, I think, of a lot of the ways we build our cities and what Ben talked about. I am not actually, I did not go to urban planning. I have a master's in public policy from LBJ, so I did go to UT, but that wasn't really how I got involved. I was just really interested in the issue and kept doing more and more activities. And here I am. Now it's my full-time job. So I will say it's one of those things that's been an evolution. As I got more involved with Aura and because of the election cycle, I was asked to join the Austin Planning Commission. So I've been a planning commissioner in Austin since basically 2023. So just over 2 years now. And of course, right after I started on planning commission is when Austin started to do a lot of housing reform. Rather than doing that comprehensive work that we had tried to do previously, which was really difficult and ultimately failed, we decided to do a lot of piecemeal work. So we did things like parking reform. Then we did minimum lot size, ADUs and sort of how many units by right. So it was just a series of like very intensive land use reforms, one after another. So I really got a taste to kind of work on housing full time, and I loved it. And so basically this past December, I was given the opportunity to join Texans for Housing as their executive director. I'm actually the first. So unlike Ben, we do not have this rich history, which I'm so in so much admiration of because Texas Housing has done great work over many years, as you can tell. Texans for Housing was actually started just about 5 years ago, and that was actually related to exactly what was happening in Austin. So one of the original founders of Aura, a gentleman named Dan Keshet, got so frustrated with trying to do things at the local level, he decided, I'm going to go start a statewide housing organization that's going to get these land use reforms done. And then that turned out to be pretty challenging. So, but the good news is that Texans for Housing has sort of had a presence at the ledge for the last couple of sessions. And coming into this session, we had an opportunity to really grow the organization and our involvement. And the timing couldn't have been better. We knew that there was some interest in actually doing a lot of sort of regulatory reforms and zoning, sort of more on that land use side, as Ben mentioned. And I think it has been really positive because we definitely do see it as a suite of reforms. Aura here in Austin, and I think a lot of the sort of we call pro-housing or YIMBY groups across the state of Texas have been really clear that we support both affordable housing efforts as well as these market reforms. So it was really natural for us to have these kind of great allies in Ben and Texas Housers because we do want to see as a suite of housing opportunities, deregulatory and otherwise. So I think that's actually been the best thing about the session we've seen so far is that there's efforts across the board to really increase supply, both through those changes on the regulatory side, as well as more support for affordable housing. We here in Austin work closely with our affordable housing partners, and I've been glad to see that happening at the state level as well. So I'd say that we, in terms of the philosophy, are very much informed by exactly what Ben was talking about at that housing spectrum, ensuring that there's availability for all sort of folks at all different times of life. And that's actually our tagline is that we're working to make housing more affordable and attainable. So attainable in the sense of, you have a two good working family, you have two good jobs that you feel like you have this sort of house that fits your needs, be that a townhouse, an apartment in downtown, or, someplace a little bit more rural. And so that attainability, I think, is something that we've really struggled with in addition to all the affordability issues that Ben talks about. So we're trying to sort of meet the entire spectrum of housing and glad to have great partners like Texas Housers. Yes, and happy to go into some of the excellent work that's being done at the Ledge. But I did also want to highlight the really great spreadsheet that Ben updates regularly on all of the housing bills at the Ledge this session, which are color coded as well. So it really gives you a good sense of the depth and breadth of what we're working on in the current session, which is moving quickly. So that's
yes,
the answer to your question. Yeah, go ahead.
You attached that link, and so that's a list of all the different bills related to housing that are.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
yeah, that would be very helpful.
I can jump in. So that's the official Texas Housers tracker, and I'll show you my ours that we use, which is a little bit simpler, just so you all can see that from our side. So this link that I'm going to drop in here is the Texans for Housing, and that's sort of our priority bills. And you can see the top ones. There's about six, basically. We're working closely with another organization you all may have heard of, which is Texans for Reasonable Solutions. They have basically been on more on that Republican deregulatory side. They did a lot of great work last session and came really close to passing some statewide housing reform bills. This session, they're working more with the Republican and center right folks, which is sort of their wheelhouse. And then we're working more closely with some of the more left-leaning centrist Democrats who I think are excited about these reforms, but didn't necessarily know exactly how it was impact their communities. And obviously, there's different concerns from different communities about the GIMBY pro-housing approach to housing. So we're trying to be really thoughtful and get engaged with those communities so that they can see what we're trying to do is ultimately supportive of their overall need in housing. Yeah, so those are kind of two different trackers that gives you a sense of the really huge number of housing bills that we have out there for the session.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could maybe pick out a few of those that you think are of particular importance that you'd want to highlight, and kind of discuss those.
Yes, and I'm going to pick one, and hopefully Ben approves of my pick on this one. But the one I'm going to talk about, and if you look at the spreadsheet, if you have it open, you'll see that there's one called HB 24 that's in the third column. For anybody who's not familiar with the ledge, a low bill number like that, like basically under 50, is really important. It means it's a priority of the House or Senate in the case. So if it's an SB and then long number, that's of the Senate, HB and a short number, that's in the House. And essentially HB 24 is something we've been working on, or I said had ideas about for years. And Texans for Housing in particular has worked on this issue for a long time, which is related to petition rights and zoning notifications. And I think this is really relevant for you guys because I know you guys just did your Forward Dallas programming work, and then now you're going to actually do your land development code updates. Well, here in Austin, we went through that process and got sued twice. So fun. It's not actually. So we have really been working at the state level to fix this, which is HB 24. And that's a state statute that exists and tells city how they have to notify residents about zoning changes and how they do their comprehensive zoning changes. And so what we're doing is basically updating that state statute in two ways. One, we're changing the rules for cities in a good way. So essentially, there is no individual notification for comprehensive zoning. So if, for example, you guys, if you start to do some of your actual zoning notification work around Forward Dallas, the rules would be completely different and much clearer and much less subject to sort of interference by groups that don't approve of what is theoretically possible with your new plan. So that's the first part. And then the second part is what we call valid petition, which is essentially how neighbors are notified about a rezoning change. Currently, people within a certain radius are notified, and if 20% of them, which can be a single landowner, decide that they don't like it, they can submit what's called a valid petition. And then the approval for that zoning change at the municipal level goes from a simple majority up to a supermajority. So in Austin, for example, that's 9 out of 11 council members. And for many years, like years and years and years, valid petitions were weaponized in Austin to make sure we didn't get a lot of housing zoning cases approved. It was like this big deal. And the only reason that's changed recently is because we've won a lot of elections. So we've been really lucky because we've had these very pro-housing council members, but otherwise we would still be seeing a lot of great projects in Austin not be approved because we didn't have the votes on city council. And that's the case across the state. In a lot of other cities and municipalities, it's a lower number. So it could be like you have to have 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 5. So like the smaller the number of council members you have, the smaller the margin is in terms of how many votes you have to have in order to overcome this valid petition. So what we're suggesting in terms of reform is basically increasing the valid petition that's currently at 20% to 60% of nearby landowners or land adjacent to the rezoning area. And then the other side would be that it would still be a simple majority at the municipal level. And I think this is really important because you still have the right to protest. You still have the right to say, hey, I might not want this next to me. Is this a rezoning? But you don't have the right to sort of manipulate the situation so that your voice as a landowner nearby gets to outweigh everything else. And I think municipalities are really excited about these changes, both in terms of clarifying what's required legally by the state, as well as this opportunity to still pass rezonings by simple majority despite valid petition. So I would say like that's one of our biggest, it's a very wonky regulatory reform, but we think it's going to make a huge impact because basically a lot of places right now don't move forward with projects as soon as they know a valid petition has been filed. They'll basically withdraw the rezoning cases. And it's particularly damaging to affordable housing groups because let's face it, a lot of people are discriminatory about having affordable housing nearby. And the number of times habitats and other light tech, as Ben mentioned, projects across the state are basically fall apart because there's this valid petition option for neighbors to say, no, I don't want that near me. So we're really excited about that reform. And the hearing for that is actually happening next week. And even getting a hearing on the state statute is like kind of a huge deal because it's been on the books forever, like literally since the 1930s. And this is the first time we're going to have the opportunity to update it. So very excited for that bill. So that's probably our number one pick. And I don't know if Ben has one he wants to talk about.
Yeah, and I apologize. I have to go off camera for a moment. I'm trying to go to a place where I can recharge my phone battery because it's about to die. But I can chat while I'm doing that. And again, apologies for being so in transit on this conversation, and not even the good kind of transit, not trains. Well, Felicity will be happy to know that I do approve of valid petition reform as her pick, and I just want to uplift what she was just saying about how valid petition is used as a tool against not only any housing development, but in particular low-income housing development. There was a very high-profile case recently in San Antonio where there was a really good LIHTC multifamily rental housing low-income development that was being proposed for North San Antonio in an area that does not currently have a lot of low-income housing. It's a wealthier part of San Antonio, and it's a NIMBY part of San Antonio. And they used the current valid petition guidelines to force the council to have to go to a supermajority vote, and they lost the approval of that tax credit development by one vote. So we were very horrified to see that, and I just want to uplift that this problem, while also simply stopping housing that's needed, that's affordable, also shows up as a fair housing issue. Tax credit housing, low income housing tax credits, for a long time in Texas were heavily concentrated in low income areas of concentrated poverty, and also areas that were racially segregated. And if we're using public funds to try to produce new housing for low income people to give them access to various opportunities, then we need that housing to be dispersed across the city, across a metropolitan area, to open up access to different types of neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods that have good schools and are amenity rich, good jobs, access to public transportation, that sort of thing. And so, for reasons, Hausers is not as active on the valid petition reform bill, but we do support it. I want to stay on a positive bill because we're also an important theme at the legislature is that you do have to spend a lot of time typically playing defense against bills that would be harmful. And that's where I'm spending a lot of my time right now. But House Bill 21 is a bill that I was at the Capitol testifying on today, is one of several bills that would reform the HFC tax exemption tool that I mentioned just a moment ago. And so just as a reminder, these are, at their simplest, these are tools that allow developers to wipe away their property tax bill entirely in exchange for producing some housing that is income restricted. And the question is income restricted at what level? And we have unfortunately seen a lot of deals across the state that are producing housing that they define as moderate income. But if you look at comparable market rate developments, the market rate units that get no subsidy or no incentive are actually running for equal or less than the allowed rents that are supposedly income restricted. That was a lot of wonky words, but at the end of the day, what this means is that we're giving away local tax revenue for no benefit in return in terms of low income housing. And so, what we've seen in particular is troubling deals where it's unclear in statute that the Housing Finance Corporation, which is usually sponsored by a city or a county, has to operate within their jurisdictional boundary. And so we've seen these terrible deals where Cameron County and Maverick County are two in South and West Texas that come to mind. There's 5 housing finance corporations that have done these deals where they are reaching across the state. And actually, I assume that many of you on this call live in Dallas or Dallas County. Cameron County, which is where Brownsville is in the Rio Grande Valley, is reaching across the state and taking a property off the tax rolls in Dallas. There are many of these properties in the city of Dallas. And in exchange for quote unquote low income housing, which is not actually low income, and they even brag about it when they're looking for investors that they don't have to reduce the rents at all. They're reaching across the state and pulling those properties off the tax rolls, and the city of Dallas has no say in the deal. It's Dallas residents who have to make up the difference in tax burden. But they are not, they don't have any say in whether these properties exist. We want a tool like this to work to produce low income housing, but it should have accountability measures to ensure that that the city or community where it's landed have some say in guiding how that development happens. It's not just like a pirate entity from halfway across the state doing that. So House Bill 2021 is comprehensive reform of the Housing Finance Corporation tax exemption tool, which would require the Housing Finance Corporations to stay in their jurisdiction and also provide a baseline of moderate income restriction requirements to ensure that the housing that's produced using this tool is actually providing lower income rents, just lower rents than what you would be able to get from a comparable market rate development, so that we can be sure that the public and low income people in particular are getting something in return for that tax exemption.
Wow, yeah, I love both of those examples because they both can clearly tie back to Dallas and how it affects us here, whether it's for companies abusing tax exemptions to then increase tax burden on Dallas residents, to the one Felicity was talking about with the petitions to stop, zoning and how that can be maliciously used to, halt affordable housing developments and everything. So those are great examples. So I guess then the next place I would like to go is, and it's kind of been touched on, and maybe Felicity can talk about this since you spoke about how the founder of your organization kind of tied into this question. How do you view the importance of state level advocacy versus local level advocacy? And do you feel that one is overlooked when it shouldn't be, or just what are your thoughts there?
Oh, I have so many thoughts about this. So last year, as part of my work as an Aura board member, we actually hosted what's called YIMBY Town, which is, I think some of you all attended, which is basically the biggest gathering of pro housing sort of YIMBY type folks across the country. We were really delighted to have it was like 400 people came to Austin and talked about all these types of work, ADUs and ballot petition and all the things we're talking about here. And it was really interesting because in that context, you got to see how a lot of different organizations have set themselves up. And in smaller states, particularly in the Northeast, they basically have they started at state level advocacy because the states are small enough to where you travel around and maybe there's only a couple of people who do kind of pro housing stuff in each township. So it made sense to kind of start at that higher level. And a great example of this is what we call the group that's called Abundant Housing Massachusetts, who's just had phenomenal impact in Massachusetts and how they do their housing work. And they are kind of what I would call a full spectrum. So they do a lot of deregulatory work, but they also work with low income housing developers. and on affordable housing issues specifically. So they're sort of the entire gamut, and they started as a statewide organization. And in talking to they brought 30 people, let's to be clear, they brought 30 people to Uniontown last year to Texas, partially, I think, to get out of the snow, but also because they wanted to see how other folks were doing it across the coast. So they really wanted it to be a learning education, an educational moment for all of their staff. But it was just fascinating to hear how they interact at both the local level and the state level and how that informs everything. And it really just became apparent to me as a person who'd worked mostly at the local level through Aura at the time that we needed more state level advocacy in the housing space in Texas. And like, it is a strange thing to say this, but I really appreciate Ben and all the work. But like, I am one of the first people in the state of Texas to get hired to do pro housing, like this sort of regulatory reform in the entire state. And that's crazy. I'm sorry. That is actually crazy that I like am one of the first people to have this type of job, because we've always had people advocating for, I think, on the tenant side and especially around affordable housing. There's people who do great work at that at the ledge, but we did not have people like me talking about things like ballot petition. So I think it's been really great to see that growth in state advocacy in Texas. And I will say that I'm glad we're getting there, but it is also funny to me that we've done a lot of work locally, especially in Austin, and I'd say there's great folks in Houston and Dallas, San Antonio. So our city advocacy, I think, has really grown up. But as part of that, we actually need some state level work that I think helps to tie us together and build some bonds that we wouldn't have otherwise. And really learn from each other, which I think is the model we're trying to sort of build up over time at Texans for Housing. So that's a long answer, but I hope you all appreciated it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. That's just what we were looking for. What about you, Ben? On state level versus local?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as I mentioned in terms of the origins of our organization, we started, excuse me, extremely local. We started at a community level, not even a city level. And we still see the value of our work being at that hyper local level. We see our organization, and we think that it's an extremely important value of our organization that we're moving alongside, we're moving with the low income people that we represent at the state level. And that means that we need to know them. We need to be in community with them, and we need to be led by them and their concerns. And so in terms of advantage, or like the shape or character of that local work, that is just of paramount important to us. That's the driver of our work. It's I think in a lot of ways the most important value that we hold. That's a double-edged sword, because at the local level, as Felicity knows so well, like there are wealthier, very well organized community members, NIMBYs, who are trying to stop all sorts of housing and don't really see either for, I don't know, as you put it, Felicity, like all types of housing for all types of people in all stages of life. Well, our focus is more directly on low income people, but it's we often have the same stumbling block. The same type of person is putting a stick in the spokes of more housing of any of those types, and better housing for those types. But for working alongside impacted people, low income people on housing issues, quite simply, in terms of organizing, local is easier. And I think that with Texans for Housing, I mean, yes, we have been working across the state for a long time at Texas Housers, but local organizing, it's just so much easier to mobilize people, because there's a direct path from what they're experiencing to the opportunity to speak to local, to drive down the street or take the bus or bike down the street, to talk to your local leaders, and try to make change. Unfortunately, there's a couple of dynamics at play. One of those, again, is that NIMBYs are very powerful, and so you're constantly sort of in this battle. But the other one is that, especially on the tenants side, because the tenant side is less about policy, and it's more about law, like legal protections. And what we've seen is a theme of preemption in a lot of areas, but definitely including landlord-tenant law in the state of Texas. And so in the past, we would have done a lot of advocacy alongside low income people, for example, on source of income protection for voucher holders. That means that your landlord can't discriminate against you, can't decide not to rent to you just because you're using a HUD voucher, a housing choice voucher. Cities, I believe City of Austin was the only one that got across the finish line in the early 2010s. They protected source of income for all renters. So basically, a landlord could not discriminate against a voucher holder. Voucher holders still had to meet all of the other criteria to they could still be screened for any other red flags, but simply the fact that they were using a voucher was not enough that a landlord could say no. And in 2015, the state of Texas passed legislation to preempt that ability and to say that local governments do not have the authority to protect source of income for voucher holders. And we've seen this happen. That's one example, but we've seen this happen on tenant protections over and over and over again. In the pandemic, for example, various cities, including Dallas, had what was called an opportunity to cure for tenants who were facing an eviction notice. An opportunity to cure was a number of days that a tenant could have to pay their back rent that they owed in full and any fines and fees, and then they could avoid their eviction. They wouldn't have to have an eviction filed against them. In 2023, the Texas legislature preempted local opportunity to cure periods. So now the state is the only entity who may establish an opportunity to cure, but we have seen little to no interest from the majority of state legislators to do so. So state organizing for low-income housing is absolutely born out of necessity in a lot of ways. We see our work as hyper-local, but unfortunately, the venue that we have available to us to try to advocate for change, in many cases, cannot be local anymore, which pushes us more and more to state organizing. And I'm very proud of the efforts of our organization, our network, including Texans for Housing, the community leaders that we work with. I just think that we have moved mountains to mobilize people and actually physically get them to the Capitol to participate in this process, which is very challenging. But as Felicity was saying, along both lines on regulatory reform and also on low-income housing and tenant protections, there's just clearly a need in the state of Texas, which is the size of a country. Let's be real. There is so much opportunity and need to strengthen and expand networks of coordinated advocacy.
Yeah, and that's kind of what where I was wanting to go. The next question is getting an idea of the main kind of hurdles which you're kind of talking about that you guys can face, and so people on this call who are interested in this, or advocacy groups in Dallas that are focused on the local level, what are ways that people can effectively become involved in helping to support state level ventures as well? I know you mentioned actually going to the Capitol being one of them. Is that one of the biggest?
I was going to say, I'm going to jump off of Ben's comment because I think it's a really critical thing to note is that the Texas legislature does not make it easy to participate in their process. So first of all, we have this crazy thing that they only meet every other year, which in some ways is good. Trust me, we don't want them meeting more often than that. On the other hand, it's this very compressed time window. And unless you're in Austin, like almost full time, poor Ben is driving back and forth regularly. I feel like all the time now. And it just makes it hard to have a big impact unless you're physically in the building. And in fact, a perfect example of that is I testified this week at several Senate hearings, and you have to physically be in the building to register as a witness for one of those Senate hearings, which is wild. Like, at least on the House side, they'll let you submit comments digitally, like electronically. No, the Texas Senate does not want to hear from you. No offense, guys. So you can, it's absolutely possible to engage with the legislature not in Austin, but they don't make it easy. And so I think that's one of the things that really is a barrier for us, especially when we're trying to talk about housing across the state. Texas is to Ben's point, a huge variety of people live here. The housing needs are different, very much from, the very southern border all the way up to Arkansas. Like, we know that we're not a monolith, just the opposite. We have several big cities that have different types of housing markets, different income levels across the state. So when we come up as advocates, we're trying to be representative of that. But obviously, the best representatives and the most impactful are the people who live in these communities. But then guess what? We have to drive you from El Paso to, or fly you to Austin to come and make that impact. And it's just unfortunate, I think, a little bit of how our legislature is set up. So we do our best to try and represent all of you in the physical space that is Austin, in the capital. But I would say for you all to be involved, there are lots of things you can do. One of the things I've been really impressed with a lot of Dallas folks that I've heard about is that they make an effort to meet with their legislators in the Dallas area regularly. So Senator Royce West, for example, Tony Rose, who's very influential, a lot of the other state reps who have offices in Dallas, you can set up meetings with them or their staff in their Dallas offices. They love that. They get a chance to hear from people locally. You can actually come and take an advocacy trip. I think it just was noticed someone was there for an advocacy day where one of the organizations will pay for a bus and bring everybody down. We're actually hoping to do a Dallas Advocacy Day later this spring with our friends at the Dallas Housing Coalition. So they're going to hopefully bring down a bunch of folks from your area with a bus. We'll feed you, tell you to which offices to go talk to, have you meet people, do all of that. And it's all organized and pre-planned. So that's kind of a good way to get involved. And I will say that the emails and letters do make a difference too. They may seem like they don't want to talk to you, but they do actually, they look at those emails, they get constituent feedback, they do hear it. And we've actually seen some of our bills, quite honestly, fail because and I should say this is probably a positive for Ben sometimes as well, is that it's pretty easy to kill a bill in the Texas legislature, A, because there's so many, and B, because if they get pushback or they really feel like it's going to become sticky, you can really get some no votes for it. So that's what happened to the housing bills, the deregulatory housing bills last session, is that a bunch of NIMBYs, particularly from that North Texas area, came out of the woodwork, inundated a bunch of emails, sent a bunch of emails, and really showed up and basically made it clear that they didn't want these types of preemptions. And that meant that we didn't get it for the entire state. So I will say that you can have an impact and you can have a powerful voice if you're organized and sort of very targeted in when you use that voice. And so I think we saw that negatively last session. We're trying to make it positive this session and really see some of these bills get over the finish line. And I'll say honestly, outweigh some of the kind of stick in the spoke, is that what you called it, Ben? That we've seen in past from these groups consistently, because they do hold back a lot of housing development across the spectrum. And I think that's one of the things we'd like to see changed.
Perfect. Yeah, Ben, Do you have anything that you would like to add on to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple things to add on to that. One, I think we are blessed with some really amazing networks. And I know that you all, I think at least a few of you are involved with the Dallas Housing Coalition, at least a little bit. And Dallas Housing Coalition is a great conduit of information and opportunities to get involved, which sometimes, to be honest, sometimes we don't know as people who are in the Capitol. If we get asked, how do I get involved? On Monday, I might not know. And on Thursday, it might be a crisis and I need you to do something right now. And so being on the Dallas Housing Coalition listserv is a great way to know about those snap opportunities to participate. But in a more general sense, in the longer term, I just think that Felicity reminded me that Dallas has really amazing legislators, and getting to know them. You might not get a chance to get some FaceTime with them between now and May because they're pretty busy down in Austin. But in the interim, they've got a year and a half when they're not legislating. And as individuals, or especially as an organization, getting some FaceTime with those members, getting some FaceTime with them physically in person, can really go a long way towards getting them to understand and recognize and familiarize themselves with your perspective and your values. And if you're their constituents, that is really important to them. And if you have a great name like Dallas Neighbors for Housing, then they might remember the organization name as well, and you can use that to reach back out to them later. And so I'm just, thinking, Felicity mentioned Senator West. You also have Senator Johnson in the area, who also is very open to conversations on these issues. You have a ton of representatives like Representative Rose, Representative Gonzalez, and like countless others that I can't think of at 7 at night. But they're all great. And I really do encourage you to spend time with them in the interim. But the other point that I want to make is that the Dallas metro area is really interesting because you have Dallas and Dallas County, but you also have Tarrant County, Denton County, and Collin County. And you have the full spectrum of ideological perspectives of Texas legislators in that four county area. And the scope of your advocacy, from what I know about it, is pretty focused on Dallas itself. But I think one way to get involved that would have a huge impact is to think about how you might work alongside other people that you know or could know to develop a regional perspective and regional power. Because I can tell you there are legislators in Collin County that have a whole lot more power at the Capitol than legislators in Dallas County, just to be honest. And if you work in coalition regionally to be able to reach different people and get some face time with those legislators as well. It may be a little bit more uncomfortable. It may be with some people that you don't agree with them about everything on, especially once you get away from the issue of housing and start thinking about their values on some other issues. But that time is really worth it. And those are the legislators I think that are the hardest to reach in the heat of the moment, when you only have 5 minutes in the heat of session to explain why they should change their perspective on a particular housing issue. Spending that time so they can familiarize themselves with housing needs prior to session even starting is so important. And I just really think that the four-county Dallas area has so much potential that could be tapped.
I'm just going to jump in here because I love that answer, Ben. One of our groups here locally is Housing Works Austin. They are really a data-driven organization that looks at housing affordability across the spectrum. Really, they've done great work with our local councils. And then they are doing a summit in April, and their specific theme was regional housing affordability, because what they've seen is basically folks venue shop. And this is kind of a big thing that we were talking about today, is that if you have really Tarrant County, which is very hard to build in, and then it's easy to put up a bunch of really terrible or maybe good, but also maybe not that great housing in other parts of Dallas or Dallas County, folks will sort of move housing around and suit it to the particular area it's in. And that means that you're not actually solving for affordability across a region, if that makes sense. You're essentially siloing them. And in Austin, that's definitely been the case. As Austin got more expensive, we saw people move further and further out. People commute from Gerald, Texas now to Austin, which is wild. But really places like Pflugerville, Brown Rock, down south to Buda, we saw a huge number of these bedroom communities spring up. And that's impacted affordability across the board. And yes, they put lower quality products in areas that were less expensive to build in. And that's okay in terms of affordability, but it's maybe not great for environmental reasons or transit and commuting reasons. So there's lots of reasons why housing is a regional issue. And I think part of the reason I'm excited about state level advocacy and connecting it to the city is because in between those two is regional affordability. And I think if we look at Central Texas, or in your case, North Texas, understanding how it works as a system is something that's been missing from the state of Texas. And I'm super excited to have that conversation moving forward after the ledge session finishes. So
yes, yeah, thank you both so much for that. I think that there's so many great ideas in there that are really exciting to think about the potential of what this group could do, and both at the local and state level. So it's almost 7. I'm not sure if either of you have a hard stop. Do you guys have time for maybe one more question?
yeah, sure. I've got a few extra minutes.
I should probably go pretty soon so I can get back on the road again. But yeah, one question would be great.
Okay, all right. Yeah, let's do. All right, what have you found? This is something as a grassroots organization that we're kind of constantly dealing with. Is what have you found to be the most successful way to activate people on these issues, which, as you've mentioned, can be a little dense and unintuitive at times, from your friends and family to even business owners and heads of other organizations?
Felicity, do you mind if I go first, and then I'm gonna have to say my goodbye
Yes,
and
yeah,
hop off?
Ben, go for
Great.
it.
Well, I think that stories of real people are really important. People have like not everyone, but some people have stereotypes in their mind of a particular type of person or type of house that they maybe feel like they have a negative experience with or negative connotation with. And I think that having stories of real people for good things that have happened in positive examples or bad things that have happened in negative examples, but that we're not talking like in the clouds here about hypotheticals. We're talking about actual things that have happened to people. And so how do you do that? You can either tell your story, tell someone's story, or it can be through a variety of materials. Are you working on videos that tell people's story or written material? It can take a lot of different forms, and it invites creativity. But narrative and stories, especially ones that can anchor a positive vision for the future of housing. I think that that's just so important. And then another thing to just get people hooked on this is give them something to do. Think about what that is. What is something that people can do to stay involved? Whether a call like this is something to do. And if somebody is interested but not totally caught up on all of the wonky nuance of these issues, give them a way to participate consistently.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. Feel free to hop off. We really
Thank you
appreciate
so
your
much
time.
for
Bye,
having me. It was
Ben.
really
Good to
great.
see you.
And please feel free to share my email with the group. And Felicity, thank you for sharing our website. texashousers.org/ledge25 is our ledge landing page. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I want to just echo what Ben said because that's what we've found a lot of success with, honestly, is getting people engaged on the issues. You care about your housing, how expensive your rent is. You give them something to do and really talking about stories. I don't know if you all have something similar, but in Austin, we have a Discord server that's extremely active and it really gets people interested in these issues. We have calls to action. So I think you all are working on parking reform. Our big issue right now is single stair. So we're trying to encourage more single stair buildings in Austin. And that's all local level. So I think folks build a community and get to know each other and sort of have these opportunities to interact. It seems like you all are very active as well. I see a great number of people on this call, which is so exciting. And I think that's exactly what we try to do is give people a variety of ways to engage. Some folks don't necessarily want to go to City Hall, but they're very happy to post a bunch of articles about single stair or work on a website or whatever it might be. So we're always trying to build up our volunteers. And I will say the thing that we've also really liked is bringing in groups, people from other groups. Here in Austin, we have a ton of UT students, so we work closely with like the UT Habitat group. They have a UT Urbanist group. The Sunrise Movement is a lot of folks who come out of UT and go into sort of climate change issues. So we really try to also make ourselves sort of a big tent coalition so they can work with Aura or they can do their own thing, but we're always trying to work together, basically. We've been lucky to have some great issues to work on, quite honestly, because I think that's the other thing is, as a group of folks who are trying to make change, it's really easy to be like, oh, there's nothing happening. Like we had a long time in Austin where it felt really frustrating to try and do this work because nothing was changing. But now we've been on this kind of great streak recently where we've seen a lot of activity and a lot of responsiveness at the city level, and that's been awesome. And so I think it's helped us to really grow our community and our sort of advocacy and how we do it. But I think that's a key thing too, is to continue to think about what's next. And so one of the things we did as an Aura board earlier this year is we created a vision of like 25 things we wanted to see done. We are not going to accomplish all 25 this year. Don't worry. But it gives us a roadmap of things we want to keep working on, places we want to focus our efforts after we get through kind of each campaign or activity. And, some things come back more than once. So like the UNO, which is our West Campus area, for those of you who went to UT, which is where we do a lot of student housing. That's actually been reformed 2 other times. So we're joking that this is UNO 3.0, UNO Dos Tres, or UNO Dos Tres. Yes, that's it. So we're working on the 3rd version of this West Campus overlay. And that's exciting because each generation of UT students is getting new version of that kind of plan and evolving. The plan is evolving as the school does. So I think that's the thing too, is there is a longevity here of getting people involved, getting them excited about the issues and having them participate in a way that feels good to them, even if it's just going to socials or writing an email every once in a while. Make sure that they feel like they're connected to the group and that they have something they can do. So yeah, I think that's probably a good place to end, right?
Yes, no, absolutely perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for all your time, Felicity. We really appreciate it.
Yes, and I was going to mention I'm going to be up in the Dallas area in a couple of weeks, and I'd love to meet with anybody who wants to chat about housing and whatnot. And I'm hopefully going to be, spending more time up in Dallas with the Dallas Housing Coalition, helping you guys as well to do more state level advocacy work. So please, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to kind of share what we're working on. And hopefully, this is the first of many chances for us to all interact. So thanks, guys.
Yes, for sure. Adam, anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
Just echo, thanks, yeah, to Felicity and appreciate it. Feel free to, to take off. If there is, I put a couple of links in the chat, related for people. We have a Zoom actually a week from tonight. So if you want to come back, make us part of the Tuesday routine, that is Dallas specific, focused on endorsements. And then we do have a group meet that people can join. That's most of our sort of internal stuff. If anyone wants to, I've got a couple minutes. If anyone wants to hang out and ask any questions about the group or whatnot in the chat or anything like, or come off mute, feel free. Otherwise, have a great night and, thanks so much for coming out. But definitely would be happy to chat with people if they have any questions.
Great work, y'all. Thanks for organizing this. It was really insightful.